In a rush, Winter awoke in her cell. Something unprecedented had just occurred within her mind along her nightly travels. This occurrence had never been shared by another dreamer before, or at least as far as the recorded data goes. Winter was one of 6 test subjects currently being held for study at a top-secret government facility, located deep beneath the city of Carbondale, Kansas. Like Catalina, Cole, and so many others, she witnesses other realities while sleeping, specifically from the point of view of an alternate self. "Whoa," she murmured to herself while sitting up. The beds provided for them were simple twin cots, resembling something you would expect in a mental institution. What had never happened before was that Winter had just looked into a world she'd already glimpsed once before. As far as anyone knew, a dreamer had never done such a thing. The multiverse seemed so vast that a world had never appeared to a single person twice, and the selection was always random. The first time she had viewed this other Earth, she was 23 years old, and had just been captured by Evan and brought to the facility. This Earth was hardly recognizable when compared to the first time that she dreamed of it. The first time around, she witnessed a world suffering from a massive number of pandemics, unlike anything seen before it on any other Earth. Strains from the CDC had been released unknowingly, and thousands of people were dying every single day, with those numbers only rising as time went on. Vaccines, quarantines, and shutdowns were all being attempted. But when she left the dream, Winter knew that nothing was working, and her alternate self from this world had given up hope after losing her final relative. There were an extremely rare number of people who were immune to the illnesses running rampant, but not enough to keep society going for very long. Last night, when she dreamed of this world again, Winter saw a world ruined by a long series of failed vaccines. The aftermath of said vaccines had only sterilized the few 100,000 humans remaining on Earth, plunging the planet into darkness. Savagery and barbarism took over the human condition with little resistance, and those who did not convert to the new way of life were eaten alive by it. Tribes were formed and many took a nomadic lifestyle in order to survive, often warring with one another over land, food, and shelter. As Winter pondered over the hellish landscape she had visited, a scratchy noise came from a speaker box connected to the camera in the upper corner of her cell, just above the steel door. "Test Subject 4, Winter." Dr. Phillips' voice spoke on the speaker, and Winter desperately covered her ears with both hands. "I don't want to talk to you," she said quietly, and the doctor elected to ignore her. "Have you ever seen a world twice before today?" Dr. Phillips posed the question, and Winter took a deep breath. "Leave me alone," she answered in a bitter tone, burying her head between her legs. "I don't want to talk to you. I hate talking about my dreams. You know the only worlds I ever see are dead ones, with scraps to call humanity." There was silence for a moment that Winter relished, as she hated the sound of Dr. Phillips and Evan's voices. She hated Evan more, that much was certain, but she knew that the doctor was not a good man either. "It's actually interesting that you mention that," Dr. Phillips spoke slowly. "From the data you and I have created over the last several years, I have realized something. Of all the subjects ever studied here, you have single-handedly witnessed more fallen worlds than anyone else. This also means that you are alive on each of these apocalyptic Earths, indicating that you are highly likely to survive one here. But why do you think that is, Winter?" Winter's mind began to drift as she thought about the answers to that question, and soon the doctor's inquisitive voice was drowned out completely. What she remembered of her family, or at least the way she chose to remember them, was that they had been wealthy, enough so that they acted like they were superior for it. Everyone except for her mother, a woman who knew her roots and chose to be true to them. In doing so, she utilized the wealth that she had married into, and had Winter sent away for many years. As a matter of fact, she hadn't seen her family since leaving for China the day after her 18th birthday. There were monks who protected the family that Winter's mother had come from, although Winter knew nothing about them, except that they were all highly skilled martial arts masters living in the States. Each and every one of them, including Winter's mother, were guided by the monks who swore an oath to protect them. These Grand Masters could turn the most disobedient soul into a hardened rock of discipline. Winter spent 5 years in China, training under these monks and honing a skill she never got to use in the outside world. Despite all of her questions, the monks would not give her a single detail on her family per her mother's order. She was simply to be groomed to protect herself and nothing more. She didn't want Winter to know her family or where her mother had come from. Winter was hands down the quickest learner the monks had ever instructed, becoming the level of a master by age 21. She could fight many of the monks on her own without being overly defeated, and there wasn't a single student who could touch her. She earned the respect of each and every monk and the masters before being abducted at age 23 by Evan and his loyal dogs. She was about to leave the monastery when it was attacked by armed soldiers who gunned down many people before Winter was found and taken. It wasn't until reaching the facility and awaking in her cell that she returned to the United States. Did her mother or father know that she was missing? Had any surviving monk let them know? Winter asked herself these questions every single day and each following night, regardless of what world she was visiting. Even in worlds that were dying or already dead, where she was suffering in the 1,000 different ways she had seen, her life was better than here. At least in hell, Winter's life had meaning and excitement. This place was much, much worse. This place was purgatory. I need you to cooperate with me. Dr. Phillips spoke, and his voice carried the urgency of a warning. The doctor has seemed especially obsessed with the pace of his work as of late, pushing both staff and test subjects alike. I want to know, Dr. Phillips continued. He was sitting across from Winter in what resembled an interrogation room, but it was a simple space for one to get away from the noise and work, like an office away from the office. This was the best place that Dr. Phillips thought he could speak to Winter, who simply refused to cooperate over the speaker communication box. Tell me about the worlds you saw before we found you, the doctor instructed, and Winter rolled her eyes as she shifted uncomfortably in her straitjacket. The other subjects had never been forced to wear one, but given the young woman's unnatural fighting ability, the confrontation with her was best avoided rather than prepared for. They were all dying or in the process of, Winter answered. Her face was bitter. But you were in all of them, the doctor pointed out. Winter sighed. Well, duh, she huffed. How else would I see them? It's interesting, Dr. Phillips continued, ignoring her attitude. Since arriving here, every single world you see is as you say. That's hundreds more than the average dreamer. I want to know about which one left the strongest impression, Dr. Phillips pressed, and his eyes narrowed as Winter glared at him. I was 16, Winter began, and she stopped for a moment before taking a deep breath. I was 16, and it was the day after my birthday. I dreamed of a world that no longer exists. I remember watching the planet die as I sat on the horizon, with alternate versions of my friends. That was the scariest part. This world was virtually the same as this one, with differences so small that I couldn't even pick them out. Winter paused for a moment, as if she didn't want to speak about the matter anymore. Dr. Phillips nodded, quickly writing in his notebook. He was also taping the conversation as well as filming it with a security camera. He didn't want to miss a single detail. You said that you watched the planet die, Dr. Phillips noted before asking, "What did you mean by that exactly?" Winter gulped and then answered, "Exactly what the statement says. The Earth was losing all nutrients and natural resources, the timeline of which was destroying the planet on a scale unimaginable by human beings. We had days before the Earth was going to be gone." Dr. Phillips' eyes widened as he asked, "Do you know how this was happening?" This was the first time he'd looked up in several minutes from his notepad, and he added, "Surely there was news coverage." "There was," Winter murmured with a slight nod, "but most people were unable to believe or comprehend why." "Try me," Dr. Phillips suggested, and Winter shuddered before taking another deep breath. She was obviously racked with anxiety over retelling the story. In this respect, Dr. Phillips could completely identify with her, for he too had witnessed a world that scarred his psyche for life. Winter whispered, "It was a monster." Dr. Phillips tilted his head. "Like mutated lab rats? Experiments?" The doctor had seen various creatures from different worlds and timelines throughout the years, so this was nothing new to him. "No," Winter said, shaking her head. "This thing appeared just outside the planet's orbit. It was an evil, terrifying presence that every living thing on Earth could feel on a subconscious level." "How large was it?" Dr. Phillips asked, trying to imagine such a thing. Winter thought back for a moment before saying, "From the ground it looked like the moon, only it was a shadowed husk of eyeballs with needle-like appendages pointing out several directions." Dr. Phillips heard her words but believed them to be preposterous. When trying to imagine a giant collection of eyeballs the size of the moon, he nearly laughed. Could such a monster even exist? The doctor almost stopped her, but then decided to let her continue. This was due to his overwhelming commitment to his work, and nothing more. "And how could such a thing steal the Earth's resources?" The doctor posed his question, hoping to gain some understanding on her dream. "The needles," Winter said before squirming a moment. "They acted like straws," the girl continued. "The monster impaled the planet with a grace that surprised everyone. There was no damage because it was like a giant doctor had just stuck a needle into his patient's vein. But on the inside, it was sucking the planet dry of everything." Dr. Phillips considered the transformation a planet like Earth would undergo if it were to suddenly be drained of nutrients and water. Oceans would dry up, and oxygen would run out before any living thing on Earth had a chance to starve to death. But was it even possible? Could such a being exist, fully capable of penetrating the planet's crust and reaching places that man could not? "How did your dream end?" Dr. Phillips finally asked, and the young woman sitting across from him trembled for a moment. "When the world's militaries had failed and governments had given up hope, there were others who stepped in to try one last effort." Winter slowed as her eyes moved to the tabletop. "I was one of them, this being the only difference I recognized between her and myself." Dr. Philip raised a curious eyebrow. "Who were you with?" "I think they were psychics," Winter said, remembering what Cole had told her of his own dream only a few weeks prior. "Each of them could do something unique that a normal human could not, and they acknowledged that I was a dreamer." "Is that why you were with them?" Dr. Phillips asked, his pen appearing as a blur as it scribbled away on the pad. "No," Winter said simply. Dr. Phillips looked back up and tilted his head. "No?" I was a dreamer, but there was more, Winter explained, still avoiding eye contact with the old man. The fight was tough and seemed hopeless until the very end. Some could create fire, and others could control objects and use them as weapons. I was moving freely from place to place, helping the others strategize their attacks. You were moving freely from place to place? Dr. Phillips repeated her words before suggesting, like teleportation? Before Winter could answer him with even a nod, Dr. Phillips shook his head and jotted down a quick note on his pad. Perhaps this was simply a normal dream, he proposed, and Winter frowned. I don't have normal dreams, Winter said with a glare, pissed that he would say something like that. If she had normal dreams, then she wouldn't be here against her will. It's uncommon for a dreamer to experience normal visions, Dr. Phillips agreed and then insisted, but it is not completely unheard of. Winter rolled her eyes and then said, There is a mark on my wrist, a brand. I gave myself this mark in the dream and then woke with it. Dr. Phillips gave her a quick, dismissive nod and said, I know about the burn on your wrist. We have several photos of it in your file, and granted, it is interesting, but it hardly proves anything you've told me, Winter. Of course, Dr. Phillips later looked into the marking on her wrist and found a distinct symbol. The marking was in this world as well, and tied to many mediums and psychics throughout history. He would try to learn more from Winter after this, and she only refused to speak again on the matter. She made him believe that it was scorn over him discrediting her dream, but there was much more to it. In that dream so long ago, when every other psychic lay dead in the battle against the monster, Winter remained. She was wounded and wasn't going to escape, sure, but that didn't matter anyways. There was nowhere to run to, and soon the planet would collapse on itself and nothing would survive that. So Winter began applying the burn to her wrist and looked within herself. Somehow, it felt as if both Winters were staring into one another. One was laying on broken concrete, and the other was in a bed. The surviving Winter would never forget what her dying counterpart had told her. Never let them find out what this symbol means, she urged with some of her last breaths, or else they'll destroy your world too.